If you put 60 kilogram boxes on poles that are even slightly, fragile or not very well reinforced, you could have an accident. You could have a problem. So
Indeed, you've got brackets on the side of buildings.
You've got to reinforce everything with brackets. You need quite a lot of equipment to get.
I think that's one of the things Kerr said. He went, one thing we definitely don't want is shit falling on people's heads.
Yeah, and it's just the installation job. I think this is one of the reasons they were saying why 5G rollout is taking longer than 4G, because 4G.
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. Oh my God, it has been so long. Last time we did one was July, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Late July.
23rd?
Right,
24th?
so it's been like 5 or 6 weeks. So sorry.
We've done as the French and just taken August off.
Well, exactly. I mean, you and I have been around, but Jamie's been swanning around not Normandy. But
Jamie.
Not Jamie.
Pierre, you mean?
Pierre, sorry.
Jamie's been swanning around.
I keep saying he's from Normandy and he tells me off because Boulogne and all that is just north, apparently.
Yes.
What's the province?
It's called North.
It's just called North. That's not very imaginative of them, isn't it?
The true North.
Right, okay. Proper northern France, like
Do you
North
get
London,
do you
North
get White
France.
Walkers there?
Yes.
And
well, we can see England on a sunny day.
And just drinking tons of rosé, apparently.
Yes,
Good
cheap rosé.
You haven't put on any weight, though. It's just a bit annoying.
Yeah.
No, and he's gone blonder.
I had to take care of kids. That burns a lot of calories.
Yes, of course. So that's why we didn't do that. We thought of doing one or two remotely, and we just thought it wouldn't be the same.
No.
So we just waited for him to finally slink back into England. Did you have to do any quarantine or any dicking about with the Rona?
No, just a test before leaving, and like day 2 here, I think. Yeah.
Right.
But you could just send it in. We didn't have to go anywhere.
Okay, well, jolly good. I mean, it seems to be getting better here.
Mm.
In terms of, I mean, it
cases are like plateauing. Yeah.
No, I'm talking about it's like civil liberties and just hassle. Compare it to like Australia, where there's just all kinds of draconian stuff going on.
Really?
Is France all right? Because I remember there was a bit of stroppiness about COVID passports. I saw this great viral clip of a bunch of French people sitting and having a picnic in the street next to restaurants instead of going and taking their COVID passport.
I spoke to someone in Paris this week.
Right.
It's actually telecom related. Guy from Telecoms.com Frontier.
Ah.
And he said that it's ridiculous now. He says you can't even go into a restaurant without showing like that your COVID pass.
Is that what it's like for you?
Yeah,
this is Paris.
I didn't go to any restaurants, but I went to the aquarium and they did ask for my pass, which is NHS, but they were okay with it.
And you had it all lined up?
Yeah, it's like they couldn't scan the QR codes. They do that with French people. But if
you just said, I haven't got one, they wouldn't have let you in?
Yeah, no. Or maybe, no, there was somewhere to test.
Coronavirus.
There was somewhere to test. You could do a test and 20 minutes later you could go in. But
okay. Did you have to pay for it?
We actually did because we're not local, but it's free for local people. It was 25 euros for
Typical parochial French attitude.
Yeah.
God, so you're still not local, even though you are French. You're not French enough.
It's to go with their NHS. And,
okay,
yeah.
Fine. Oh, because you're not paying into the system.
Exactly. Yeah.
And Ian, you went to Slovakia and you ended up shelling out more on tests than you did on getting there, didn't you?
Yeah, it was 120 to get the tests before we went for 3 people, and then the same for day 2 afterwards. Paid about 15 or 20 euros each, I think, in Slovakia to get the antigen tests to come back. So what's that? You're getting close to 400 quid. It's better than it was at Christmas.
I mean, it's not bad.
No, I mean,
at Christmas we paid 150 quid per test.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, so did I to get to Canaries.
And then there's a lot of hoops you have to jump through with telling the Czech authorities, because that's where we flew to, that we weren't actually staying in the Czech Republic. They wanted to see a train ticket in customs.
Right.
We were going over
Make sure you weren't just going to hang around breathing.
Well, we were going to stay one night in Brno. We couldn't do that. Otherwise, you'd be sort of in breach of their rules. So, I mean, once we actually got to...
Yeah, then you can chill. Yeah, well, that's always the case. It's the transit that's just so odious.
Travel, to be honest, is a hassle enough as it is these days.
I know.
But you've added all this on top of that, and it's...
Well, that's why I just went to East Anglia.
Yeah,
which is really nice. Up there, it's nice to be reminded that there's lots of cool places to see in England. It's just that the whole of August has been pretty shite weather. It's just been an England-shaped cloud.
Yeah.
Although apparently it's not so bad in the north.
Next week it's due to go up to 26 here.
Yeah. So that's good. Yeah, we often get a bit of a shit August and then a half decent September.
Yeah.
To keep us grateful for any sun at all. Okay, good. It's good to be back, isn't it?
Yeah.
Did you have have people been listening to the pod even while we haven't been doing any, Pierre?
Of course they have. They're hardcore fans.
That's it.
City of the month, City of August, Izmir, Turkey.
Wow.
Followed closely by Bonn, Germany.
That's
so
good.
So random, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Pretty random, yeah.
Pretty sure I haven't written anything about Turkey, one way or the other.
But they do have telecoms there apparently these days.
Yeah. Well, no, Telecom's quite
it's
quite
very,
avant-garde,
very,
isn't
very
it?
advanced, yeah.
US being the first country.
Turkcell,
Turkcell, that's it. Yeah.
The US is still the first country, though.
I just had a good flame. I just wrote a story. In fact, it'll be the last thing we're going to talk about. But my pet subject of cloud platforms like AWS policing what they host. And some guy, presumably American, just went, "Who wrote this? Ted Cruz," who, for those who don't know, is a conservative American senator.
Yeah.
And so I just went, yeah. Yeah, he's always writing stuff on Telecoms.com, dipshit. So that's that. And I've just noticed another one coming in where someone's accusing me of being misleading on our lead story. So I'll on the first thing we're going to talk about. So I'm going to get straight into what we're going to talk about. God, I've forgotten the order. Do I do the where you want to listen to and watch it bit now, or do I do it after I've
After
all? Okay. Okay. Do you know what? In a month's time, I'm going to be 50 years old.
I know.
So it's no wonder I'm
you've got
starting
a
to
good
forget
excuse.
stuff.
Your mind's starting to
Yeah,
wander.
exactly.
You've called Pierre Jamie.
Yeah,
the order wrong.
Jamie.
you passed your best already.
But I still put in a good shift in the pub on Wednesday, didn't I? So.
You did, yeah.
That's the bar.
It is.
Cope with it better than me, I think.
Okay, so what we're going to talk about, we are going to start talking about Wednesday. On Wednesday, we had a first actual event, as in people getting together, since the lockdown, basically.
Yeah.
And that was organised by the former regular podder, Jamie, which is maybe why I called you Jamie. He's in front of my mind, whose beard is now getting into a sort of Brian Blessed level.
Oh my god!
Of
is it square?
That's
not quite
That's
square.
a good comparison. It does look quite.
But
like
it looks
Brian
like
Blessed's
looks
beard.
like it's the home to sort of birds and small mammals to me.
He's going to love to hear this.
Yeah. But no,
like,
it's magnificent. Fair play. I've always said, if you can have a beard, go big. No offence, Pierre. So he's got a magnificent beard, and him and Howard, and we met Abby again, who used to be at CC Group, and she's now at Hill and Knowlton, who are doing their PR, and Ed. So four of them, and we met Kerr Anderson, who just told us a little bit, which we'll get into in a sec, about what's going on with Vodafone, and we had some beers while it was happening, and then we went to the pub after.
Yep.
And then felt pretty shit yesterday.
Yeah, and today.
And Ian's still not feeling 100%. So there we are. So yeah, and you're younger than me, so look at me. What a dude.
Yeah. More experience.
Go your liver.
Yeah, well, I've got the sort of clear metabolic bias going on. So yes, and just to remind you that if you're watching this on the site or on YouTube or on Facebook, you can listen to it on SoundCloud, iTunes, Spotify, and all your other podcasting platforms.
Nailed it.
Yeah, I know.
Maybe
I was really starting to struggle with that last.
Maybe 50 is okay
before the
after all.
summer. Right, we're going to start. I think I'm going to hand the ball straight to you, Ian, as I've wittered a fair bit. Tell us how the event on Wednesday went that we both went to.
Yeah, it was good. I mean, they played it down as this isn't actually that big a news announcement, but I thought the stuff they talked about was quite significant because they sort of went on a quite length about their sort of network strategy, I guess.
Well, I've got one. Sorry to butt in. I've got one possible reason why they might have played it down. Do you remember when BT had that digital event?
Yeah.
And we were both reasonably shitty about it. Just like what was the point of that?
Why. Yeah.
Well, Jamie had a chat with me after, and he was like, bloody hell, what's BT done to piss you off? And it clearly, I mean, I didn't think I was being that shit. I was just going, I didn't see what the point of it was.
Yeah.
But, it depends on who's listening. And maybe Jamie with his PR ears was like, oh, I wouldn't like it if Scott wrote that about us. So I think to a certain extent, maybe, and I'm sure it wasn't just because of me, but they were keen to just sort of manage expectations. But as you say, it was. I mean,
their bit of news was this deal they've done essentially with Ericsson.
Yeah.
So basically, Vodafone has it's very much focused around the 5G rollout, but they've been investing in these very high performance radio units called massive MIMO units, which include a lot more transmitters and receivers basically than
MIMO standing for multiple in, multiple out. Yeah,
exactly, and it gets measured in the number. So I think your massive MIMO is sort of 64T, 64R, and it even goes up to 128. I think
that's transmitter and receiver.
Yeah, and then you also have these 32T, 32R as it's called, and you go down from that to sort of 8T, 8R, which is the kind of stuff I suppose that you might use in rural areas or where the capacity demands aren't quite as great. But
we never used to get so worked up about MIMO a generation
no, not
ago.
At all. And you go back to the
it's just
days
a 5G
of 4G.
thing, basically.
It's a 5G thing because 4G is less than that. 4G, I think, is sort of 2T2 or a 4T4R.
Right.
So the 8T8R radios for 5G should be quite okay. But Vodafone's argument anyway is that some of its rivals have relied too heavily on these 8T8R units, and that eventually they're going to regret it. They're going to find in a couple of years' time, or maybe a little bit longer than that, they're going to have to swap them out at great expense. And so its strategy is to put in, to rely really heavily on massive MIMO.
Yeah.
I mean, I actually checked in with them again today and said, do you have any 8T8R at all? Because I didn't ask that question at the time.
Yeah.
And the response from them is very little. There is some, but it's few and far between.
So the interesting thing about it, my understanding, I'm sure this is a massive oversimplification that you can correct, but you're basically creating sort of lots and lots of parallel streams, and thus fattening the pipe.
Yeah.
And so I would have thought massive MIMO would be principally a mid-band thing.
Yeah,
you're not going to be doing massive MIMO over 7, 8, 900.
I think it is a mid-band thing, I would think. Yeah.
Because the whole point of, a lot of people perhaps don't necessarily understand this. There's nothing intrinsically better about mid-band, there's just more of it.
Yeah.
So you can create a metaphorical fatter pipe.
Yeah, but I suppose if you're putting 8T8R radios into that mid-band, you're not going to get as good a performance as
then
you're
if
getting
it's
from
64 or
the
32.
massive MIMO stuff, basically.
But for rural stuff, which is nothing we'll probably come to, because they did mention some refarming of, was it 900 megahertz?
Yeah.
Then I presume this massive MIMO is not such a thing.
No, but it sounds from what Vodafone's saying, even in less densely populated areas, they're still doing sort of the massive MIMO. I mean, as I say, I got the response today from the spokespeople, the two that you've mentioned, and they said few and far between 8T8R in their network, which I guess is the differentiation they see between themselves and the other operators, is that they're relying much more heavily on massive MIMO.
And there's talk of future-proofing and all that.
Future-proof. So the point that Kerr Anderson was making is that, we're maybe a bit slower on the rollout, because it's hard work to get this massive MIMO stuff. So this is the point. It's quite... The boxes that you used to buy with massive MIMO, the ones they started off with a couple of years back, Ericsson's their main supplier, and they were buying these 64 TR boxes, basically, that weighed about 60 kilograms, Kerr Anderson was saying. And the trouble then is that they're very energy intensive. They use
and that was their main PR angle, is how incredibly green.
Yeah, well, exactly. But these are really energy consuming, and they're just a bugger to install, because if you put 60 kilogram boxes on poles that are even slightly, fragile or not very well reinforced, you could have an accident. You could have a problem, So
you've got brackets on the side.
You've got to reinforce everything with brackets. You need quite a lot of equipment to get.
I think that's one of the things Kerr said. He went, one thing we definitely don't want is shit falling on people's heads.
Yeah. And it's just the installation job, I think. This is one of the reasons they were saying why 5G rollout is taking longer than 4G, because 4G boxes were just a lot easier to put up than these massive MIMO units. Now, the big news item that they were coming out with in this week was they're changing now from these 64 TR ones to 32 TR. And a lot of this ties in with some announcements that Ericsson was coming out with last year about how it's managed to get the size of its boxes down quite substantially. And
there's been a bit of an arms race on weight and size.
There's been a bit of an arms race on weight. So they're only sort of 20-odd kilos. And Kerr said that the performance, because technology just gets better, the performance they're getting from the 32 stuff is just as good as with 64.
So the sort of top-line claim is... same performance, half the weight and energy use,
and the energy use is down by, I can't remember what the figure is, 40% less in a day.
I think it depended on environment, but I think on the whole around 50.
Yeah,
close enough to half.
So it's quite a big cut in energy use. So what they've done is they're not taking out the 64 TR ones that they've already put up, but from now on they're moving to these 32 TR ones, and I think they've agreed to buy 1,500 of them, basically, from Ericsson, which they'll install at about 500 sites. I mean, it's still quite a small part of the footprint, if you think about it. It's an 18,000 site network altogether. So it's still a relatively small part of it.
So that's where, although it is significant news, and the way I framed it was great free marketing for Ericsson as well, because they're basically bigging up an Ericsson product.
Was check the claim about, our rivals have relied heavily on 8T8R. I mean, it's all very well for them to say that, but what's the truth? So I checked in with 3 and 02, and they both responded, but neither of them has got back with any information. I did end up writing a story and just saying we hadn't heard any confirmation of details. BT got in touch with me about what they're doing, and they say that they're using 8T8R mainly in rural areas, and that their urban strategy has been to use 64TR, the same as Vodafone, and that they're now sort of a bit like Vodafone, really, they're now changing their focus to 32TR because of the energy improvements you can get. But they did admit that there are cases where they've struggled to get planning permission, or because of other constraints that you have when it comes to putting up massive MIMO stuff in cities.
Mm-hmm.
There are instances where they've gone down to 8T8R in order to get a 5G service out there. So I think there's some truth in what Kerr Anderson was saying, that, BT does sound like it's been a bit more heavily reliant on 8T8R than Vodafone has.
And I guess the proof of the pudding will be in sort of data rates that you get from Vodafone like next year onwards.
Yeah, I mean, I think I personally don't think it's going to make a big difference for a few years. I think there might come a point in, as he said, the future proofing several years down the road, maybe when we're all, walking around with virtual reality headsets on or something, and you really need massive MIMO to be absolutely everywhere, even in the remotest village. Maybe then BT's got some kind of problem with its kit and it does need to start upgrading. I mean, that seems to be what, it's almost like putting fibre in, isn't it? Do you keep upgrading that DSL line, and pushing fibre a bit further out, or just take the plunge and go,
yes,
we're going to dig fibre to the home now?
And he actually gave us a CapEx number, didn't he? Because
there's 600 to 700 million a year they normally spend, but he said he could easily go above that if he was allowed to do all the stuff that he wanted to do, basically.
I better get the story up, because I did, at the bottom of the story, I had a plug for the pod.
Right.
I said, what did I write? I said, there were plenty of other interesting conversations, including why 5G is rolling out slower than 4G did, Vodafone's UK CapEx budget, so we've just covered that, and why Open RAN isn't necessarily the best thing since sliced bread, which we're going to do a whole Open RAN segment.
Well, they did talk about Open RAN quite a lot as well. I mean, I was going to mention that, but...
God, Pierre, did I do what we're going to cover?
We only did this, and then you said we might come around to talking about Amazon later on.
I forgot to do it.
Yeah.
Does it matter?
No.
Okay. Don't worry about it.
Shit, and you applauded me, whereas I actually dropped the ball.
You're actually showing your age.
I thought you had done it. But, yeah.
I know. It's only just occurred to me now that I didn't say that we're going to talk about this. Then we're going to talk about sort of balkanization and 6G and that sort of thing, which Open RAN might come into. And then we're going to finish off talking about AWS censoring its platform. Yeah. So there, you could cut that one in.
But the Open RAN stuff was quite a big topic at the Vodafone.
Well, why don't you talk about that?
Yeah. So this is the other thing. I mean, it kind of ties in with 3G, interestingly, which you asked quite a lot about earlier on in the press conference, because, and this seemed to be the thing that surprised analysts there, like Gabe, is how reliant Vodafone still, and I'm guessing other operators as well, they're not unique in this, but how many 3G handsets are still in the market?
I know. I mean, I thought I thought, is it just me?
And they didn't have figures for it, but they just basically said lots of people who don't really care about technology, people like my parents, I guess.
I think it's biddies, Luddites.
Yeah,
hermits.
And of course they're all dotted around the country, so it's not like you can say, oh, they're all in Scotland, so we can just shut down. we can shut down 3G everywhere else and keep it going in Scotland. They're all over the place.
Just add to their animosity towards the English.
And they seem to have this problem that some people only have 3G handsets. Some people have 4G, this is the odd one to me. Some people have 4G handsets, but they're still on 3G plans, which you'd think would be quite an easy thing to resolve.
Do those still exist? 3G only plans?
Well, apparently they do.
So.
Apparently they do. Yeah, I mean, I just thought as soon as you got a 4G phone, you sort of went onto a 4G network, and they don't really do it by 3G or 4G.
Well, apparently there's some
data,
with some older phones, like 6 years plus. There's like firmware issues.
There's firmware, that's an issue.
And
as
some
well.
people do still have 6-year-old phones.
Yeah,
and I guess they could argue, if they're not heavy users, that it still gets the job done.
So basically, the problem is they can't shut off their 3G network. And his comments, Kerr Anderson, he's obviously not a fan of 3G. I mean, he basically admits it's a technology they want to get rid of, and and one of the main reasons that Vodafone needs to get rid of 3G, interestingly enough. Whereas other operators are trying to phase it out so they can refarm spectrum and just save money, Vodafone needs to get it out of the way because it's the only operator that's got an Open RAN strategy in the UK at the moment. It's the only one that isn't just doing trials; it's actually building an Open RAN network.
And it turns out 3G is shit for Open RAN, or the other way around.
So some of the suppliers of Open RAN kit do say they have 3G products, like Parallel Wireless, for instance, and Mavenir, which were both trialled by Vodafone, interestingly enough, but neither of them got any work. The network it's building...
sell it to Kerr very well.
No, and his boss, Andrea Donner, I guess, who's the head of networks. But the network they're building, which is mainly with Samsung, although there are other suppliers in the mix as well, is a 2,500 site deployment that's phasing out part of the Huawei stuff that they have been using, which they have to get rid of under government rules, because Huawei's just too dodgy these days, it seems.
According to the government.
Yeah, and the trouble is that Samsung doesn't provide support for 3G, and the other companies to that extent either. So what they'd have to do is sort of have
Intel, which as you astutely point out, is dominating the Open RAN ecosystem.
Yeah.
I mean, Intel's got no pedigree
heavily
in that side of telecoms at all, to the best of my knowledge.
Yeah, well, they
although, no, actually, that's not strictly true. There are other chips that we don't ever really talk about where Intel's been a supplier, but I think they're just more sort of general processing type of functions.
It's essential processing stuff that they're doing, but you don't, that's true, you don't really have alternatives to them at the moment, so it's sort of monopolistic in that
Samsung,
way.
Intel,
Samsung doesn't have 3G
because they're relatively new to the radio game.
Yeah, I mean, until recently, I don't think they had 2G. I mean, this was raised during all the parliamentary committee sessions that they had about the Huawei swap out, when they used to get people like Andrea Donner on, and also Howard Watson, who's the BT CTO. One of the things they both said at the time was we can't use Samsung because we need to support 2G and 3G, and they don't have products. And I was really interested about this when they announced Samsung as the partner, which is pretty recent. It's only June, I think, they announced their Open RAN partners. One of my questions is, well, what about 2G? I was not so much interested in 3G because a lot of people have talked about shutting that down. But what about 2G? And they do now seem to have a 2G offering, but they clearly don't have a 3G offering. So what it means with Vodafone is that if it can't phase these 3G handsets out quickly, its only option is to sort of wait to launch Open RAN, if you see what I mean, in some areas, or have two parallel networks. So have Huawei there for 3G until the deadline for getting rid of it entirely, which is, I think, 2028, and have Open RAN there for 2G, 4G and 5G. Right. And he said his description of doing that was it would be a dog's dinner of capabilities. And presumably it would be quite expensive as well. Yeah, you have two parallel networks at the same time.
I think another dilemma they've got is... I think they said something like 90% of their data traffic goes over 4G, which is what you'd expect. And I certainly know that was one of the things I brought up when I was asking about a 3G. I said when I was off in East Anglia, to the grievance of especially my kids, there were many places where it just fell back onto HSPA Plus. Now, I remember when HSPA Plus came along, they were calling it like 3.9G and shit. Yeah. It's shite.
I think T-Mobile in the US even called it 4G, didn't they?
Yes, they did, typically.
Should be enough to load Instagram.
Well, it's not enough to do much. I'm telling you that. I mean, I actually think, I don't know what's going on, but I think it's actually, maybe it's just amount of spectrum committed to it, but I think it's probably worse than it was 10 years ago.
Oh, yeah, right.
I feel better now.
You feel, oh, that went down all right. You got to do that. Oh, that went down all right.
Look at me. Yeah. Terrible earlier.
That's what you get for going for a run. And so obviously I'm not surprised nearly all the data goes over that, because there'll be a bit of 5G. I think, didn't he say something like 5% or something? Some 5%,
small amount. Yeah. I didn't 5%
on 5G.
That in any of my coverage.
So let's say 5% still going over 3G.
Yeah.
I don't know what they're doing. Obviously, as you infer, Pierre, it's very basic stuff, like maybe just WhatsApping or whatever.
Yeah.
But the other thing they've got is voice fallback. I know people use voice less, but they still use it. And what you can't have, it's one thing not being able to connect to data, but if you can't even connect to voice, like one sort of vaguely semi-related thing, and I brought this up with Co. And it's funny, sometimes you're chatting to people, when we're just chatting off the record, it's just when we were after, just you and me were chatting to him and Howard.
Yeah.
Defensive.
Well, no, you just sometimes get. I mean,
we can't repeat now.
Yeah. Well, exactly. But you still sometimes get that slight rabbit in the headlights. So you ask a question, and you can just see that they're calculating where's this fucker going with this. And what I say, and I just mentioned a story that I'd recently written about Apple apparently sticking satellite chips in future iPhones, especially the low Earth orbit, the sort of Elon Musk OneWeb, that sort of thing.
Can only imagine the battery life.
And I think it's initially designed just as an ultimate fail-safe for like contesting emergency services. So I mean that's a thing, and that comes back to the PR challenge they'd have with cutting off 3G.
Yeah.
Not only are they going to sort of isolate some old granny who still find some way of getting in touch with her son, probably, and tell him how Vodafone's ruined her life. But yes, imagine if someone couldn't contact the emergency services because of something like that. That would be...
The other thing I found interesting was the sort of pace of... I mean, we mentioned this a little while ago because it ties in with how hard it is to put massive MIMO stuff up, but the whole pace of 5G deployment being quite slow going, compared with now, and then he had really interesting reasons for that. I mean, he went on quite length about that, I thought. But
I mean, I thought he was very honest. I mean, he said this during the presentation, so I don't think we're saying anything that's...
No, this was on the record, but he was basically saying that the difference from 4G to one of the reasons is it's just
the user experience.
User experience just isn't that great. Compared with
which we know, but it's still kind of
from an operator,
pleasantly surprising to hear.
So in other words, there's less incentive for us to spend money on this
because no one's going to moan if they can't get it.
Complain exactly, and we were just talking earlier, Pierre and I, about because I've suddenly got a 5G phone, not because I went out to try and get a 5G phone. I was just due an upgrade, and it happens to be.
You got quite a new phone, have you?
Yeah, and
you got the latest iPhone.
Yeah, but I never have 5G on because if you put it on low battery, which I tend to do just to not burn it up as quickly, it tends to shift you off the 5G network anyway and back onto 4G.
In a sort of frank admission that
it's like, well, it doesn't bother me because the 4G network on my network is good enough. So,
but you're not a TikToker.
Now, maybe if I did a lot of TikTok, I'd miss it. But the coverage of 5G, just going back to this of how slow it's rolling out. I mean, I remember when EE launched 4G, and 2 years later, they were at 90% population coverage. 2 years after launching 4G, we're now at the point in the UK where 5G is 2 years old, both BT and Vodafone.
Nowhere near that.
And so BT recently actually came out with a figure. What they've tended to do is not provide population coverage figures because it's not very good. They've tended to say we're in this city.
Right.
But they did when they were pressed.
There's a fair bit of smoke and mirrors and
tell me that it was 40%.
Isn't it due to spectrum and the pandemic? That doesn't help.
It's difficulty of rolling out equipment because 4G was very easy to install. Compared with these massive MIMO boxes. You have to shut down London streets and get planning permission. That's one reason.
Yeah.
And the other big reason is the user experience just isn't that good. They're obviously not in a desperate hurry to build it out quickly.
But in terms of spectrum, there probably is a coverage angle because if you get into mid-band, which is what these massive MIMO radios are all for, you do get much lower range than sub 1 gigahertz.
For sure. Which is a question that wasn't asked, actually, and I regret not asking that.
Right.
What's your densification
You're probably
strategy?
shit-faced by that stage.
Yeah, someone should have asked that, really. What about putting new masts in?
You're always going on about fucking 5G. So there is that, and then they've got. So there was a sort of minor story about them refarming 10 megahertz worth of 900 megahertz spectrum from 3G to 5G. Yeah. But they're not going to refarm their 4G low frequency stuff because that's doing a great job. And as you said, there isn't a great incentive to do it.
I think you need to have some low band 5G as well, just to have support for 5G in wide area kind of support.
Well, if you're going to make the claim, so like T-Mobile in the States is able to make all these lofty claims about 5G coverage because it's got all this 600 megahertz
but the experience
spectrum.
Isn't much better than on 4G.
No, exactly, because there's only one tiny little dribble.
The trouble is nobody cares at the moment. I mean,
but the number is one more.
Yes, it's.
The only time this is ever going to make a difference is when all of a sudden South Korea is going to be way better than everybody else because their site density.
Or China.
Well, site density is good in China, but it's way better in South Korea. They have they have. If you look at, I think the way they measure it is per 10,000 people. How many sites per 10,000 people? And if you look at South Korea, it's the
You're
figures
just tripping over the
they're
base
all over the
stations,
place. Whereas here, it's really sparse in comparison.
What is it? Is it easier to shut down the streets and stuff like that?
Well, no, South Korea hasn't done this with 5G. South Korea's had a long history of just having lots of sites, and I don't know what the backdrop to that is.
There was, I think, way back there was a big state initiative, certainly for broadband.
I mean, they like doing that kind of thing. So
they just decided, because don't forget, South Korea is an amazing thing. Like in the backdrop of what's been going on with Afghanistan and all that sort of thing, there's only really been one example of quote nation building that has been a resounding success, and that's South Korea. Because the Korean Peninsula was fairly devastated after the Korean War in the 50s, and then Western money and democracy and all that sort of thing. We created this, or helped South Korea to make it out of itself.
I mean, Japan's like that, I suppose, post-Second World War, no?
But it already was.
Yeah.
I mean, it already was a big industrial power. That's why it was able to bring it on.
But I suppose.
Anyway, whereas, and I think, I mean, it's a complete tangent, I won't dwell on it, but I've got a feeling that America and the West, after Korea, thought, this nation-building business, piece of piss.
Yeah.
And then they haven't managed to do it successfully anywhere since. Anyway, the reason that's relevant to the telecoms thing is there will always have been a big emphasis since the Korean War finished, let's say from the 60s onwards, in Korea on infrastructure, on let's start properly, let's do it as we mean to go on.
This is Ericsson's argument, and I can see the point they make here. You know, they keep going on and on about the fact that Europe is very reliant on something called DSS. It's a bit ironic because they're actually one of the main backers of DSS originally, but now they've gone to this position of sort of complaining that there's too much reliance on dynamic spectrum sharing. It's basically using low band spectrum splitting that between 4G and 5G, kind of sharing
and dynamically splitting as
and they're saying, well, yeah, you do need that, but you also need to have a mid-band rollout as well. And this is where Europe falls short. You know, and look at this is backed up by these population coverage stats from the operators in the UK, where 5G. I mean, BT's probably in the lead, and it's at 40% 2 years in. And you look at South Korea for 5G coverage, and you look at South Korea. Yeah, but and the point you just made, you put these massive MIMO boxes up and run it in mid-band spectrum, and you're doing it with 3.5 gigahertz on a grid that's been designed for 1800 or something. You're going to have gaps. You're going to have around the cell edge. It's not going to be good enough.
Yeah.
Whereas South Korea's got this network that was so dense anyway that they can use mid-band for 5G and just have brilliant coverage. And I think the difference nobody cares at the moment. This is why the whole T-Mobile argument, they're only using low band spectrum and it's no better than 4G. Who gives a shit right now? I never even need to use 5G. But if an application comes along all of a sudden that's a bit like the equivalent of Uber, that you can only use, Uber would never work on 3G.
The usual ones they throw at us, like AR, VR, and all that sort of thing.
So Uber would never work on a 3G network. You'd have to be in 4G. You'd be looking at the car and it'd just it'd fail basically, and you get frustrated customers. If something like that happens that you have to have a 5G network for, then all of a sudden Europe is going to look like a real
killer app is not immediately
that killer
obvious.
app's not here at the moment. That's the trouble.
Okay,
so
we've only got about half an hour left. If we're
blimey.
Because we're having a little sort of get together of light reading / Telecoms.com people past and present after this, and we're due in the White Hart at 4. So we've got
we've got loads of beers to drink.
Half an hour, 3/4 an hour. Well, we're doing all right. Pierre's chipping in. There's only
no, not yet.
I might try that other Hazy Jane if that's all right.
Hazy Jane.
So I think we're good. We're going to get through them. I'm not worried. But let's change the topic, and only a little bit though. I've got a lot of traffic in the last couple of weeks has basically been churnalising your stuff, Ian.
Right.
So it's like the podcast in microcosm where I sort of hang on to your coattails certainly on the stuff of any substance. Gobshitery, I'd like to think I lead the way, but the stuff of telecom substance, I lean heavily on you.
Well, if Gabe had been on as we wanted, then we'd both have been just getting quiet.
Should I see if he's around?
Nah, we've only got half an hour. And one that got absolutely loads was you did an interview with Boje Ekholm, the CEO of Ericsson.
I did, from Slovakia.
Oh, you actually did the interview from Slovakia? Yeah. You're so committed.
But that was the only time he could do the interview.
Right.
And they said, you're on holiday, do you want to bother with it? And I was like, well, yeah, because it's not going to come around for another year.
Ericsson, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I'm sure, I mean, you don't track your reads like I track mine, but I'm sure you got loads of reads because I got tons of reads just for covering your
I know it got picked
article.
up by the Swedish national press quite a lot because obviously anything to do with Ericsson, which must be Sweden's biggest company.
Check you out.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know,
IKEA.
Volvo and
IKEA.
I would've thought.
It's
Yeah.
up there anyway. It's one of the biggest companies.
Yeah.
So anything that Ericsson does is...
They should do
big
flat
news.
pack radios. Anyway.
Actually, they do look like IKEA radio. If you look at Ericsson's massive
They're all
Brahma
called,
units,
they're all
they
called
look
Billy,
like that.
all
Yeah.
called, or some weird sort of Scandinavian
Assemble
word.
your own station yourself. Yeah.
The Asgard radio or whatever. And the thing that I picked up on from your story that I put in my headline that yielded lots of reads was him warning about a 5G/6G standard split. I dwelt on just the 6G part of it because there's 5G standards kind of here already. And this comes back to an enduring sort of mega topic, which is the sort of balkanization, as I call it, i.e. the standard split or the technology split that is born of basically all the stuff that happened under the Trump regime of, of blacklisting Huawei, of banning Chinese vendors from getting hold of any chips that have been made using American technology. But basically a deliberate attempt to create a technological schism between the US and its allies, let's call it the West, and China and its allies. And I think, China's system, sort of ecosystem of allies isn't so overt. Like there isn't NATO.
No.
And that sort of thing. But again, as we're hearing about with Afghanistan, they're quite happy to go. They've got this Belt and Road Initiative. What China's really into is chucking money into a country and then effectively going...
Owning it.
Yeah, it's a bit like a Godfather. He goes, one day and that day may never happen. I will call upon you for a favour, Afghanistan.
That's pretty good.
And
that was a bit of George Bush there as well.
Yes, I wouldn't.
It's trying to be
I didn't
Marlon
try and
Brando,
go
but-
full Marlon. No.
Good luck trying
You
to
have to
repair
puff out your
us.
cheeks with tissue paper.
Yeah,
and all that.
exactly.
Good luck trying to repair us, and when you can't.
Yeah, exactly. When you can't, we'll just have your fucking airport or something like that. And anyway, so let's say West versus East for simplicity, and that does increasingly seem to be the case. A few weeks ago, I wrote a bit about how even trans-Pacific submarine cables, you've got ones that are only going to like Taiwan and not China, and all that sort of thing. And it just seems to be setting up more and more. And anyway, I'll hand it back over to you because I'm obviously paraphrasing your reporting. But Ekholm, I think quite rightly, was going, we got to watch out for that because we might not even come out of that split very well.
Yeah. I mean, I wanted to ask him about geopolitics because, he's the CEO and therefore he should be able to comment on that stuff. And, questions about the business, which I did talk to him a bit about and haven't actually covered yet in any stories. But, I wanted to get his views on this kind of schism, which is a big topic, I think, in telecom at the moment. And his worry is, and I think, it's not just his worry, I think it's a big concern in the industry, is that this schism gets taken, if you take it right to the ultimate place where it could go, then you end up with a kind of split in the standards themselves, yeah? Mm. So the 3GPP, which is the body that oversees the kind of standardization process for 4G and 5G, is, it's the one place still, really, I suppose, or the one major institution where Huawei is allowed to carry on sort of meeting alongside US and European firms, and they all work together, and it works with them pooling technology. And the idea is that you get a global standard. That,
like the US even lets us talk to them, isn't that nice?
Yeah, and the US
nice
actually had to come out, I think, a couple of years ago when Trump was still in power, and there was a worry, actually, given all the restrictions that were being imposed on Huawei at the time, and you can't have any dealings with Huawei and you can't provide American expertise or technology to Huawei, they had to come out and say, well, it doesn't apply at the standardization level, essentially. Because otherwise, I mean, their fear was that what happens then, you get US companies not meeting in the 3GPP, and the standard becomes even more dominated by Huawei, I suppose.
Or it's just a straight up split.
Or there's a straight up.
And
so this is the thing, and this is Ekholm's point, is that if he sees that there's a risk this could happen, and lots of people have talked about this. I think some analysts that we refer to, and Dean Bubley's been going on about this a bit with 6G. Yeah. Do we end up with two 6G standards, one for China and one for other regions? And Echo's
and it's not that there's no historical precedent for different standards like
completely, yeah.
TDS, CDMA,
So
and all that sort of thing.
First of all, he recognises this is a very real threat, which is interesting that the head of one of the biggest equipment makers in the world sees this as a danger. And secondly, he thinks it would be a bad thing for the West, essentially.
Yeah.
You know, his view is that, you know, with China eventually with its you know, a lot of it came back to population. He kept bringing up this point when I was talking to him. You've got a country there of 1 billion people. You know, years ago, China was regarded as like a sort of copycat, wasn't it? And you know, and it's still tarred with that brush. I think today it's still sort of seen as a intellectual property thief. But I think
that's increasingly irrelevant.
Yeah, and
I
no
mean,
one
even
would
if it still
dispute-
does it, which
Yeah.
I wouldn't put it past certainly the Communist Party to get up to any kind of dirty tricks.
Yeah.
But I think it's beyond question that China's genuinely innovating at a very high level, completely
innovating at a high level.
So.
And Ecom's worry is that if we end up with this kind of split in standards, can the Western ecosystem keep up with the Chinese one?
If you read it, it didn't occur to me when I was covering it, but it occurs to me now, he's kind of conceding, and I've certainly spoken to people on the operator side who concede this point, that Huawei's still kind of kicking ass on the technology side.
Yeah,
he's kind of conceding that, isn't he?
He is, yeah.
And I think, and I've had that confirmed by third parties who I've got no reason to doubt their expertise on it.
Yeah.
So, you know, just on paper in terms of looking at the brochures.
Yeah. And he talked a lot about education, actually. I mean, I didn't refer to that as much in the story because it starts to get a bit dull. But the fact is, you know, he was just going on about how many engineers get produced in China every year. And you look at Europe, he said there's no real good institutions outside the UK and Switzerland.
Really?
Technology institutions,
What,
yeah.
Not even in Germany, for
He
example?
said there's no high quality institutions for tech.
I thought Germany would have amazing technical
outside
colleges
Switzerland,
and shit.
and I don't know what institution in particular he was referring to in Switzerland because I don't know enough about technology institutions that a company like Ericsson would look to, and the UK. And he said, you look at China.
In the UK, he's talking things like Cambridge and Silicon Fen and
I'm
stuff
guessing
like that.
so, yeah. But he
Large
you know
Hadron
he said this is what politicians should be focused on, really.
Yeah.
You know, is trying to do something about that because
and China's
if
got a crazy work culture as well.
If we end up with this split standard, then we're just going to struggle to keep
they're all
up.
working like fucking 60, 80-hour weeks.
Yeah. And then I suppose you get the possibility of if you do have an ecosystem that's divided, what happens in countries that are sort of contested markets? And I think there's already been a bit of this going on in Africa, where Safaricom, there was a deal about Safaricom where the company backing the license, the consortium of financiers backing the license said, you have to use Western equipment.
Was that the Ethiopia thing?
Yeah, it was in Ethiopia. Yeah. You can't use Huawei equipment. But what happens if these African countries, which a lot of them are falling under China's sort of influence anyway, aren't they? They're, you know, and they're going to see options provided to them by the Western ecosystem and the Chinese ecosystem. If the Chinese ecosystem is that much more advanced, and there are capabilities that you can get that you can't get with the Western one, then it's going to make it hard for the Western ecosystem just to compete in contested markets.
Yeah, and then beyond the sort of arms race type of narrative, there's the fact that, you know, I think telecoms has been a general success in part because everyone's just got together and just thought, fuck geopolitics.
Yeah.
Let's just...
Sorry.
He's playing back my swearing. And you know, we're about the science. Sort of in ways that hasn't happened, for example, biomedically during this pandemic.
Yeah.
We've been quite grown up about it, haven't we?
Yeah.
And we've got on with it. And the Americans and the Chinese between them seem to be contriving to arse that all up.
It's quite interesting, I think, this standards argument, because even people who are very, very fierce critics of China and Huawei, I've noticed, still seem to... you can't find very many people who think that a bifurcation of standards themselves would be good. And one guy I spoke to about this week is our friend John Strand,
right,
who I think he wouldn't dispute this. He's probably one of the most outspoken critics of Huawei and comes across as being quite anti-Chinese state, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And even he said that he wouldn't want to see the 3GPP, you know, that standardization process split. He said we need that because we do need to work with China. We need to have, you know, that kind of collaboration at that level, and it's only by having a group like, you know, the 3GPP, which is recognised by the WTO as a proper standards body. You know, it has certain principles it has to adhere to. It all works in quite a sort of nice democratic way. We have to have that that has to continue, and we have to have sort of Chinese
And
representation.
that's presumably,
in that.
even for someone like John Strand, who, who, as you said, doesn't disguise his distrust of the Chinese state, and thus pretty much anyone associated with it, including Huawei.
Yeah.
He would presumably think that it's still good to have a global organisation.
Completely.
I guess so. It's just putting up guardrails whereby it's all, I don't know, it's all quite open source or something. Everyone can see what's going on. There's an opportunity for someone to just nick a bit of technology and then go and do their own thing.
Yeah, I mean, I spoke to him about it because one of the big stories this week, which ties in, I think, with this bifurcation issue, is what's been going on with another group called the ORAN Alliance.
Yeah, well, I was going to mention that, but you go ahead.
I mean, this is the main specifications body behind Open RAN interfaces that are being generated. And the news story this week, or late last week, which Politico broke, was that Nokia has basically paused the technical work it's doing in the ORAN Alliance because it's worried about this very issue. It's worried about not being compliant with US law.
It's worried it's going to get told off by the Yanks
it's going to get told off the law.
Chinese.
And the big problem is that the ORAN Alliance includes a lot of Chinese members, and some of them are subject to US sanctions. Yeah.
Yeah, and so they're just like, what
and
are
so
we going to do?
Nokia's worried, and I've spoken to a few people on background about this, about what the exact concern is, and apparently it's very much a US origin technology or US staff issue. So basically, if Nokia has US people or US,
so it's not worried about Finnish people talking to Chinese people.
It's a bigger concern for American companies that don't have staff in other parts of the world, for instance, and companies that have lots of staff in America or US origin technology. I mean, Nokia, you've got to remember, is kind of a US/European company because it includes
Lucent, where it does business.
Bell Labs
of
and
course.
everything. So, basically what this is, as I understand it from talking to people about it, if you're allowing those people or exposing those technologies to the ORAN Alliance, and there's companies in the ORAN Alliance that are on the entity list, like the US Trade Blacklist, you're basically sharing US expertise.
And we've seen, and this is one of the problems with the Americans who've been so draconian and vindictive about anyone who, the way they're still trying to get the Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou.
Yes,
this isn't to prejudge how it's going, but it looks like what they've got on her isn't the worst stuff.
Yeah,
at best, what they've got on her is that she sort of, was a little bit.
I think the whole thing's starting to look quite vindictive.
A little bit economical with the truth in certain environments, but then it's not like the Americans always.
And it can't be a precursor to clamping down hard on Huawei because they've already done that.
So the point being that they've set this precedent of being very harsh towards people they're not happy with.
Yeah.
And so, of course, other companies are shitting themselves like Nokia and just going, I don't want to even risk it because they might just shut us down. Look what they did to ZTE and Huawei. And
I know the attitude, so people within the ORAN Alliance and some of the kind of real, the sort of people who want to make Nokia out to be, it's a member of the ORAN Alliance, but actually Open RAN's not really in its interest, and this is all about them trying to slow things down, which I personally think isn't the case at all.
I think at least it's in its interest to keep an eye on what's going on, isn't
it? Their view is, and I've had statements on this, I think I've put a couple in coverage I've written, and I've got something else on Monday to go up on this, but their view is that the ORAN Alliance should be treated in exactly the same way that the 3GPP is treated. It's a total inconsistency. To have the 3GPP given this, we'll allow them to have Huawei in, but we can't. Yeah. We're not allowed.
Now, I agree, it is inconsistent, but I bet one of the reasons is because ORAN has, in my opinion, somewhat prematurely been seized upon as this strategic thing for vendor diversity because they've kicked the Chinese out of them and all their allies. And I think, and you've just seen, again, I keep referring back to Afghanistan, but it's just been such an illustration of how incredibly clumsy and blinkered and damaging state overreach can be.
Yeah.
They've done this thing. They've gone and steamed in. They haven't achieved anything. They botched the pullout, and all of it just says, God, if the state just wasn't involved in this stuff, things would just be better.
Well, and I think related to that, the ORAN Alliance itself is, they're basically saying we should be treated the same as the 3GPP.
Yeah.
But the ORAN Alliance isn't a standards body.
No.
It doesn't meet WTO.
Is it owned? Has it got any commercial aspect to it? Well, does someone own it?
The 5 founding members of it have a veto, for instance, on anything that happens. Now, they include...
Do you know who they are off the top of your head?
Well, I can tell you who one of them is. I mean, two of them are AT&T and China Mobile, which basically means that the Chinese government has a veto on stuff that happens.
In effect.
It doesn't...
Just like the UN.
It doesn't meet WTO guidelines of what a standards body is. And that's not just me or opponents of it saying that. The European Commission believes it doesn't meet those criteria.
And presumably there are all sorts of bits of best practice you have to adhere to in order to get the rubber stamp for that.
So I asked them questions this week about, do you need to make changes to be, if Nokia's going to, because it's interesting how this is going to play out. If Nokia's going to go back and start doing technical activity and be completely sure that it's compliant with US law, does that mean the ORAN Alliance needs to make a lot of changes to the way it operates to make it more transparent, to take away that veto right, for instance? And they haven't responded.
Looks like they do, though.
They didn't respond to questions.
Right. And
which doesn't really, the whole idea about being transparent, I mean, come on, ORAN Alliance people.
If you sent me an email, I wouldn't respond to it. Like, who's this fucker think he is?
Yeah, I know, but you've got a good reason for not responding.
No, it's not. Obviously, I'm being facetious because you're a person who they definitely should respond to.
Yeah, I mean, they responded to some earlier questions I asked, but when I asked that question, I haven't had anything back from them at all.
Yeah, which always speaks volumes, and we've got others. I'm not going to name any names, but we've all got PR contacts who suddenly go quiet when you ask something awkward.
Yes,
and I think and
Mavenir, who's heavily involved in the ORAN Alliance, who I also asked the same questions to, declined to comment.
Yeah.
So there's clearly an issue there, isn't there? Yeah, let's be honest.
And they haven't even got their ducks in a row in terms of a sort of a PR answer. I mean, they could just have a sort of this is a fluid situation and under constant review, or some kind of vague thing like that. And at least that would have given you something to copy and paste in, and then you wouldn't be moaning about them going all quiet on the podcast.
The contradictions are so funny, aren't they? The US is all enthusiastic about Open RAN because it sees it as a sort of way to sort of propel US companies to the forefront,
like Intel.
Yeah, exactly. And as an answer to the Huawei problem. And yet this group that they've got, which has got Chinese members in it contributing intellectual property and on the entity list, is the only group that does ORAN specifications and seems like it might be in breach of some of these US laws. I mean, the whole thing's just they've got to sort that out. A bit of a mess.
And back to my previous point, that the fact that the state, both the American state and the Chinese state, seem to have direct involvement in it is just guarantees they're not going to sort it out, because the state, if it gets half a chance, will fuck things up.
For sure.
I think I'm feeling more anarchic than ever these days. In fact, there's one other thing that's worth saying just about all that stuff. Another sort of follow-up from the... and I should note that Wei did a great write-up of the ORAN sort of crisis that we were just talking about as well.
Yeah.
On our side. So it's not all you.
No. That's always
I know,
stuff.
I'm just joking. I'm the one who blows smoke up your ass. Just a very quick one I wrote just before we came out to the pod. Boyer doing basically a follow-up, very similar interview to yours with Reuters, where his emphasis was, we're not going to give up on China. We can keep fighting for it. And I was like, okay, yeah, fair enough, Boyer. That's the right thing to say, obviously. Yeah, you're not just going to go, oh fuck it.
You don't put fighting and China in the same sentence.
He said to me, we're gonna fight like hell to get back.
Fight like hell. There we are. He said that to you.
That was my quote. Yeah.
He goes, yeah. I think the quote was, it wasn't quite so punchy. We've been in China for 120 years, and I don't intend to give up easily. We're going to show we can add value to China. We're
going to fight as hard as hell, he said to me. But look, I mean, the nice thing about the situation for Ericsson at the moment is, and the reason he's saying that is because they lost this this work, didn't they? They had a very big share of, not a very big share, but they had a decent-sized share of work for a Western company last year.
They went from 12% to 2%.
And they've gone from 12 to 2 this year. And the nice thing for them, though, is that they're thriving just about everywhere else. So with this relatively small share of work they had in China, it's not great. It does wipe something off the sales. But they're such a profitable company at the moment after all the changes he's made. And 5G is really taking off in a lot of the other markets. They're still in a pretty strong position. I'm sure they're fine.
The reason I brought it up wasn't, other than the fact that it's sort of relevant to the general geopolitical stuff we're talking about. And I thought it was quite funny. There's another quote. I don't know if it's similar to anything he said to you in your interview, but he said, "I don't believe we had any help from the Swedish government, to be honest." I thought that was a bit of a moan. And I wrote, but it's not obvious what it could have done.
Yeah.
that the Swedish government. It's possible. I think the Swedish regulator probably could have fudged it a bit
well,
better.
I think they were unhelpful by banning Huawei.
Yeah, but what are they going to do?
Yeah. But I said this to him, so this is quoted in my story, so I can say this.
Yeah.
I said to him, okay, but what about the argument? Can the Swedish government just turn a blind eye to the arguments that, Huawei is a security threat, that it doesn't abide by trade rules, that it rips off intellectual property? And his response was, yes, but things are they're basically so entangled. It's like Volvo cars, for instance. Should the Swedish security services buy vehicles from Volvo, which is owned by the China? Yeah.
So it is. Yeah.
Okay. Who knows where the software comes from?
Fucking good point.
So he was saying things are so entangled these days that once you start to ask questions like that, you're getting into a whole confusing.
Yeah. So again,
array
it's all the Americans' fault. They wouldn't have done it if the Americans hadn't decided to take the lead on this. But and I'm still not convinced that they do pose this security threat. One thing I am increasingly convinced of. I mean, we're seeing this. This isn't something I've really written about because it's not very telecoms. But there's been this big crackdown on big internet companies in China by the Communist Party, Tencent, Alibaba, Baidu, all those sorts of companies. Yeah. And now, all of a sudden, they've all decided to put billions and billions of dollars into this. I forget what the euphemism is for it. I'll see if I can find it. I was chatting to Wei on IM about it. Because obviously I'm always, when stuff like this comes up, I'm always really interested to hear Wei's perspective. So China's common prosperity. Bloody hell! I didn't think that would be such a difficult thing to say.
That's those beers on Wednesday, I believe.
Yeah, common prosperity drive, and common prosperity is a euphemism for redistribution of wealth, basically. So
Moneytron.
What he's basically done is he's got stuck into them. Jack Ma went bye for about 6 months.
Yeah.
He's got stuck into them. He's thrown all this antitrust shit at them. He's gone, I'm not happy. And I think, I'm sure there was some genuine concern about accountability and business practices and monopolistic behaviour. But I think generally what happens is they get the companies up against a wall and they go, I tell you what, look, here we are. We've got you banged to rights. You're in trouble. There's no getting around it. But I tell you what might help it go away. You just fucking scratch our back a little bit. Yep. Throw a bit of money in the pot. Let us spy on your users a little bit, whatever. And then turns out we might not be so bothered. And I think there's just this constant sort of mafia-like protection racket going on between big state and big business. And I think it's happening in the States. People were surprised that the Democrats are going after big tech on antitrust just as much as the Republicans did, because big tech is quite rightly viewed as biased in favour of the Democrat Party. It's certainly, when you look at political donations and that sort of thing, it's clear.
Yeah.
But I think they're going after them again to just get their collaboration, and we're already getting stuff where you got all these like Amazon and Google and Microsoft suddenly came out and said we're going to collaborate with the government over security stuff. And so I actually think the real danger is the West is learning a lot from China.
Yeah.
Both in terms of things like this, things like lockdowns. You look at what Australia's doing.
System.
Australia's lockdown stuff makes China look like
the whole facial recognition
laissez-faire
software, from what I was reading in The Atlantic, I think wrote quite a long story on this that you put on Facebook. Sounds almost exactly the same as China's sort of surveillance
social
program.
credit, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So this is all happening. And so, yes, that's my long way of going. I find it perfectly easy to believe that Huawei is under more influence by the Chinese state than, say, not that they're equivalent companies, but let's say, than, say, Ericsson is by the Swedish state.
Yeah.
But I'm still not convinced that necessarily means it's such a security threat that we should have done what we did.
Yeah.
So anyway, but it is what it is now. And it doesn't seem to be any putting that genie back in the bottle.
No, I think it's just there. I mean, there's too much water under the bridge, as they say.
It's just done. It's just going to keep getting worse.
Yeah.
All right, let's quickly move on. Talking about sort of surveillance and Orwellian stuff. AWS, which I like to have a pop at, and we're hoping. I'm going to say it on the pod, and then if it doesn't happen, I'm going to look a twat. We're hoping to get Daniel Royston on the pod, who is the most sort of conspicuous pro-public cloud person. And she listens to the pod. Hi, Danielle. And she knows that we're constantly having a pop at the public cloud, not because it doesn't do everything that Danielle says it does, but because of the whole general premise of handing over control of all your shit to a third party. Now, I'm not going to jump the gun and preempt what she might say, hopefully when she's on the pod and we have this discussion live. But other people I've seen going, well, you got nothing to worry about. It's all good. It's all under control. It's all transparent. Everyone's got rights. As long as you don't mess with their T's and C's, then you're laughing. But this is the problem. And I've had this. We've had debates with colleagues over this who, like, when I went quite hard on the Parler thing at the start of the year, they pushed back and they were like, well, what the fuck do you expect? Parler's full of Nazis or whatever. The problem is, it's not just Parler. It's not just any individual company. It's the fact that people like AWS or people like Facebook or Google get to make the call. You have relinquished control. Like we said loads of times, if I relinquish control to you, I think we're good mates. We operate in good faith. I don't think you've got any ill will towards me, but you've still got the control.
Yeah.
Let's say, hand over control of my life to you, and you go, Scott, I think you should. I think you'd actually be a better plumber than the journalist, and I've decided that you should retrain as a plumber. And I go, well, I don't want to.
Yeah.
Well, tough. I've decided. I've got the fucking control. And so there was just a little thing I wrote up today. This was from Reuters. And they chatted to a couple of sort of anonymous sources. And apparently Amazon's creating this team of moderators for AWS, where they're going to kick off anyone that gets involved with shit it doesn't like. Now, the way it'll position it is stuff that goes against its policies. But the problem is, its policies are always changing, and it can change them unilaterally whenever it wants.
Yeah.
So it's not the second time.
What is he up to today?
He's left his professionalism in goddamn.
He's doing it
He's left
again.
his professionalism in Boulogne. I'm going to start saying Normandy again just to annoy you. And and so like there's one little quote. I'm going to. I thought there was one close. I was going to chuck a full tin of put a punk IPA at him. There's one little quote. What is it? Yeah, Reuters got a statement in response to this thing, and the statement from them is, quote, AWS Trust and Safety, capital T, capital S, works to protect AWS customers, partners, and internet users from bad actors attempting to use our services for abusive or illegal purposes. Now, illegal, good.
Yeah.
I would always have my big thing. Obviously, there has to be some moderation of platforms. I moderate the comments platform on Telecoms.com. You don't have a comments platform because the moderation tools you weren't happy with or whatever.
I don't know what's going on.
You've got to moderate. If I'm the keeper of what's on Telecoms.com, the buck stops with me. And if something goes up that's libelous or harmful or whatever, then the buck stops with me. But I would always have the cut-off point at illegal.
Yeah.
So someone puts a comment going, yeah, here's a great link for making improvised explosives.
Yeah.
I'm not going to let that go up, am I?
Yeah.
But if someone just says something a bit shitty about me or about one of the companies we're writing about, that's not illegal, so I'll let it go up.
Yeah.
There might be a slight cut-off point if there's...
You actually welcome that kind of thing.
Well, I
you?
do, yeah. So illegal, yes, but they go bad actors. Who the fuck defines a bad actor?
Yeah, I know, yeah.
So that's an utterly subjective, vague thing. And then abusive.
Yeah.
So here's the thing, and in fact, I won't name any names, but we were having a little chat, weren't we, on Wednesday about AWS, because people are aware that you and I sort of push back quite hard on it, and from a telecoms point of view, one of the reasons it comes up so much for us is that a lot of telcos are putting a hell of a lot of their sort of back end, their infrastructure.
Yeah.
Whatever they can virtualize and softwareize, they're just lobbing it on the public cloud because it saves them money for having to maintain their own servers. And to be fair, I'll always say both sides of it. By the sounds of it, the tools and the analysis and the insight and the data mining and all that kind of thing that people like AWS and Google and Microsoft can offer is excellent.
For sure, and the savings you can imagine are great. Although, there is now concern, I think, about the cost side of it as well. Once these companies get tied into those deals, okay, it looks great at first, but what happens in the future? It's like the landlord arrangement, isn't it?
It is.
It's this whole, the cell stuff sells, mobile sites, sort of selling you towers is a big trend at the moment in the industry. As soon as one operator does it, they all start doing it because they can't think originally for themselves, so they all think it's a good idea. And okay, I can see the immediate attraction. You get some money in, you start to rent that stuff. But you're basically becoming
it's
a
the sell and
tenant.
lease back thing.
And then what happens in the future of that market? There's already competitive concerns about the position of some of these independent towercos like Cellnex and how much they own in some countries. What if some
and also how much they owe? Well, I mean, they're heavily leveraged, as Americans would put it.
Very leveraged.
They've got to get it back someday.
Need to get money back. We're going to increase the rates. All of a sudden, your OPEX bill's going up in the future. It seemed like a good idea now, but 5 years
and then there's nothing you can do about it. You can't buy the infrastructure back again.
I mean, I think that the public cloud thing, I know it's not a public cloud, but Facebook, and I just think regulators have been behind on a lot of this stuff,
Massively.
And there was an interesting thing with Facebook recently with the DOJ, I think, not the DOJ, but one of the American departments starting to investigate the Instagram and WhatsApp takeovers. It was a few weeks ago, wasn't it? They've raised this again.
And they're trying to sort of reverse engineer it.
It's so funny because if you go back to the original approvals that same agency gave when it took over, they didn't raise any of the objections they're coming out with now. There was no, and it should have been obvious to them. It's almost like they're
punishing them for making a success
of it. And it should have been obvious to them at the time that something was amiss. Why would Facebook pay, what was it, 19 billion for a company called WhatsApp that had a small number of employees
and fuck all revenue, a ton of users,
and they paid 19 billion for it. Yeah. Don't you see what's going on here? And they were too stupid to realise it, and now they're trying to row back the decision.
Or they just couldn't see the overlap. They couldn't see where the Venn diagram overlaps.
But regulators in the public cloud they're just so behind the curve. That's the problem.
But I genuinely think back to what I was saying earlier. I think the main reason they're doing it now is just to give themselves negotiating bargaining chips.
Yeah.
And I think this is where I hesitate to use the word, but one thing that defines fascism is heavy collaboration between the state and corporations.
Yeah.
Corporatism.
Yep.
And I just increasingly get the sense, and I think the Rona has accelerated it, that we're looking at China and thinking, hold on, we're missing a fucking trick here. They're doing it quite well. Like Xi Jinping, to be fair to him, seems to have executed this attack on Chinese big tech perfectly.
Yeah.
I mean, they're all just in lockstep now.
Yeah.
And and this thing I was talking about, that I was chatting to Wei about, this common prosperity. I'm going to click through on the Reuters thing. The sums of money involved are absolutely huge. No, I can't see any sums. But they're basically getting the likes of Tencent to just hand over tons of money, which then the Communist Party is going to distribute. So what it's really interesting is it's a form of like socialism / communism, but in hindsight. So what he's done is he's let the companies get big.
Yeah.
In a sort of capitalist way, in a laissez-faire way. And then once they got big, he's like, right, I'm having some of that.
Yeah.
And he seems to have pulled it off. I don't know if you could pull it off in the West, but I think increasingly the West are thinking, fuck it, we're going to give this a go.
Well, they've taken their sort of, coronavirus rules from China anyway, in some cases. I mean, look
in Australia's case.
Done.
But
I think even European countries looked at what
and there's also all this debt they've got to pay off at some stage.
Yeah.
So back to the AWS thing. I just think, let's see how it goes. I'm conscious of the fact that I might sound like I'm always having a pop at them. And I'm sure AWS's motivation, if it is getting this team of moderators, is partly to protect itself legally.
Yeah.
Like I think it kicked off some ISIS group from AWS a little while back, and no one's got a problem with that. I'm not going to be the one who dies on the ISIS hill in this particular case. Perhaps bad choice of words there. Anyway, but it's always a thin end of the wedge, and I feel and people talk about the slippery slope fallacy, but it's not a fallacy necessarily. It can be used as a fallacy, but viewing the thin end of the wedge, yes, we're attacking overtly illegal or internationally denounced things today.
Yeah.
But then what if you get say they're always going after extremists in inverted commas, but then I share some stuff from Steve Bannon or Donald Trump or of Milo Yiannopoulos or something, and then that's enough to brand me an extremist. Then I get kicked off. I wrote a thing a couple of weeks ago, and maybe we'll talk about it. Another guest we're hoping to have on is a friend of the show, Mary Clark, and I created this account with a social media site called Locals to potentially promote my book. And the way Locals works, it's created deliberately as an alternative to A, other social media platforms, and B, other sort of crowdfunding platforms like Patreon. and you can give away some stuff for free. It's a bit equivalent to something like Substack, or you can charge people like £5 a month to see special premium shit. I didn't expect anyone to give me any money, but Mary did, bless her. She put herself up for $5 a month. And then one thing led to another. She had this fraud attack on her bank account. I can say all this because she's tweeted about it and been open about it. She has a fraud attack on her bank account, and so queried a bunch of payments with her bank and didn't recognise the ones to locals for me. Yeah. So they got queried. And locals has only got one financial service provider partner called Stripe, which is this big success story, started up by some Irish guy called Patrick Collison. And Stripe just basically immediately charged me £15 per query payment. There were two. So it's £30 down and the payments retracted. And basically then sent me an email going, we've decided you're too dodgy, we're not going to do business with you. It eventually got resolved. Mary's bank went, yeah, it's all good. And I went, so am I allowed back on Stripe now? I went, nah, you're still too dodgy. So that's it.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I'm permanently kicked off Stripe. And this is just another example. And now that basically means I'm permanently kicked off Locals. And Locals was deliberately set up as an alternative for people who maybe had been kicked off other platforms or who didn't like how things like Patreon were run. And yet it's basically fallen victim to exactly the same thing. So this is another illustration, like AWS and all that sort of thing, where we've got these digital platforms, whether it's payment or whether it's cloud hosting or whether it's social media, and we're increasingly living our lives over it, and they're all governed by people who are completely unaccountable and are a sort of tiny little oligopoly that also seems to increasingly be in partnership with governments.
Yeah, completely.
It's just all a bit fucking shit. Anyway, we're coming up to 4 o'clock, and you don't want to keep them waiting, so we better wrap it up.
Let's take this conversation to the pub.
Indeed.
And film it there.
Yeah, exactly. Bring the camera, Pierre. Cool. Okay, well, I'll wrap it up there, and thanks a lot for sticking with us through the summer, and make sure you join us for the next one.